Hello, and welcome to the Present and Awesome Summit. It is day 3. This is, I believe, the 5th conversation that I'm having. And here across the screen from me is Mike Basch. Hi, Mike.
Hello.
I'll just intro you a little bit so people know who you are. So first of all, my name is Elissa Weinzimmer. I'm the founder of Voice Body Connection. If you're just tuning in, thank you so much for joining the summit. And Mike is a really incredible human. I've known you now, Mike, for really less than 2 years, like a little over a year.
Months.
But Mike has had many titles since I've known him, but currently is the head, and actually I'm going to have you say all the words. It's migration, venture, partnerships, at investment. Thank you. I missed one at George Kaiser Family Foundation in Tulsa, Oklahoma. So Mike, welcome to the show.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Will you share with everyone a little bit more than I just did about what you do in the world, what your work has been, what's gotten you to this point? Just tell us a little bit about your background and your past in business.
Yes, so my background has mainly been in the private sector and mainly been in startups or investing in startups. I started working when I was 16 at the Coffee Bean and Tea Leaf in Los Angeles. By the time I was 18, I became the manager, and then when I was 19, I opened up a store a few blocks away and did that through undergrad and business school, building 22 stores with over 400 people. And then while doing that, my friends had started a t-shirt company at undergrad in our fraternity, and I joined as the 5th partner, and the 5 of us grew the business to 160 people across 6 countries. And then we sold the business. After selling the business, that business took me from LA to New York to London. And then when we sold it, I kind of spent some time in Israel, kind of like figuring out what I wanted to do next, and was investing in more companies. And I realized I wanted to do something more impactful, but couldn't quite figure out what that was. And one of the companies that asked me to head that up or co-run it, and that was a mobile advertising company called Spot Ad, and we built that to 45 people across 4 countries. And I left that very abruptly to work for Secretary Clinton in 2016, and running a large part of Madison, Wisconsin. And we delivered Madison. We lost the state in the election. Afterwards, I've been doing different things in the impact space, in the investment space, in the nonprofit space, before ultimately landing in Tulsa, Oklahoma. A buddy of mine moved out here last year, and he convinced me to come and check it out. And I did, and I kind of thought they're doing some interesting things out in Tulsa. There's a man by the name of George Kaiser, and his family foundation is working on addressing intergenerational poverty. So how do you make it so every single child, regardless of their status at birth, has the opportunity for a healthy, happy, safe, and secure life? And so with that is a component of not only addressing the needs of the children, but making sure there's jobs for them when they grow up. And so my role here is helping to create 21st century jobs in Tulsa. I think fundamentally as a country, it's interesting. A lot of the young talent has moved to the coast. California and New York have one thing happening, and everything in between have another. My product company did business in 36 states. My mobile advertising business did business in 3. And so I think as a country, we need to do a better job connecting the middle with the coast. And my job is to help companies with large footprints in California and New York expand into Tulsa, set up secondary offices, and help migrate young talent back into the heartland. And so hopefully that can have a large-scale change on the environment here.
Cool. Now, okay, you skipped over a part of the story, which is how you and I met, which was there was a brief period of time. Mike's like, I have to talk about it? Yeah. Can you tell us what we're up to?
Yeah, so when we lost the Clinton campaign, I was upset, not only in the fact that we lost, but really the fact that our youngest candidate was 67 years old. And I felt we didn't have great options to choose from. And if you look at the Trudeaus and the Macrons and even David Camerons of the world, and there's a lot of young up-and-coming politicians in other places, why in the U.S. are we leading politics to our parents and grandparents? And I was at the time not thrilled with the performance of the mayor of New York. I thought he was okay. And I thought cities and states never been more important given the what's going on in D.C. And so I ran for mayor of New York on a generational-led change platform based on social and economic justice. And I did that for a little over 4 months. It was an amazing experience. I'm happy I did it. I'm happy I dropped out. I met a lot of interesting people, including yourself. And yeah, that was November 2016 to March 2017.
Right. So I got connected to Mike because there were just people coming to your campaign from all different places. And someone said to me, you know, I think Mike could use a speech coach. Would you like to work with him? And so we started working together in that way. So that must have been about 4 or 5 months we were working together. I was coaching you on all your speeches for the campaign, which was super fun. And what I saw that I want to bring attention to, and you know, if it's not already apparent, one way that I describe Mike Basch is that you have an ability to galvanize groups of people, to get people to do things. You had an incredible team assembled around you for the period of time that you were running a campaign. I am now based in Tulsa, Oklahoma here along with you, and wouldn't be here if it wasn't for you putting together this campaign. And so you have a really, I mean, I'll be the first to say you have a really incredible ability to influence people and, you know, create change and create new ideas and get people to follow along. And not everyone has that capacity. So I think that there may be a little aspect of presence involved in why you're able to do that. So let's go in that direction. But let me first ask you, before I ask you about what you do, let me ask you a question that I've been asking all of the guests this week, which is, what is your definition of presence? What do you think presence is?
It's funny because this is an area my mom is really big on, and probably an area that I've consciously tried to improve upon in the last few years. For me, it's about being, I don't want to say it's about being fully aware and cognizant of what's going on in front of me and in the moment, and not just in terms of myself, but the other people in the room, and understanding everything that's happening collectively around me, and like not just physically, but mentally, like in the moment.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I love that definition. I would agree with it. And I know, like, in this world of, especially given what you do, I mean, you're constantly sending emails on your phone, like we all are, that's our lives. So I guess the question could be, what are the tools and techniques that you use to get yourself present for those important conversations? How do you balance the fact that we need to be present with this, but then we also need to be present with, you know, the human beings in front of us?
So I would say I've done a couple of years ago. My phone owned me, and I think I've recently been becoming more and more comfortable turning my phone on silent with no alerts, and then just checking it periodically versus like having things pushed onto me. As crazy as it sounds, you become victim to your inbound if you're that available, and because people are so connected, there's kind of always someone communicating to you. And so that actually was probably like the single biggest change. From like a technology perspective, I'm more comfortable not replying to everything right away, even if it's in my inbox, and you know, and even in realizing that very rarely is something truly urgent, though sometimes work-wise that can change. In terms of individually, I think if I'm with someone or a group of people, I can sometimes find when I'm not being present, I realize like my head is somewhere else, or it can be either way. It can be, usually most conversations, interactions are two-way. There's two people, interacting with one another, or multiple people interacting with one another, and everyone's fully engaged. And then sometimes you get a thought and you kind of see your mind drifting, and you're not completely there, not completely present. I believe you would actually call that first circle, maybe. Where you're kind of very internal.
Yeah.
And then other times, actually, something that I was much more guilty of in the past was being in what you would call actually third circle, where it's like I'm just like diary of the mouth, pushing information. You're speaking and I'm thinking of what I'm going to say, but really I'm just like, just speaking. Versus, and this is, I would actually attribute this, to our time together. And one of my bigger takeaways was, understanding that a successful interaction is when both people are kind of communicating back and forth, really listening to what the other person's saying and understanding where they're coming from, replying to that, and like it's like a two-way kind of give, take, push, pull, versus any one person. It's not success if you've dominated the conversation, just because you got out everything you wanted to say. And I think that was stylistically much more so how I used to work.
Well, and that's part of the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you specifically, is because you and I have had these conversations in the past, the two of us, about how difficult this stuff is. Like, I think I certainly will be the first person to say, like, look, I have a tendency, I'll just define the terms that you just used one more time so that people know what they are. So this is actually Patsy Rodenberg's language. It's not mine. She's a British voice teacher, but she talks about first, second, and third circle. And like you said, Mike, first circle is the circle of, it's the energy of pulling back, like sort of being in your head and trying to like figure everything out over here, like be away from the person. Whereas third circle is that spew of language, like just blah, 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 blah. And then even when someone else is talking, you're not paying attention to them because you're ready to say the next thing, right? That's third circle. And second, of course, is that give and take and flow of energy. And, you know, in the online course I teach, as well as in all the conversations and work we did together when we were working on the campaign, we kept talking about like the tools and techniques to get more present, because I think so many of us in this day and age we're not surrounded by tools that support us to do that. Like, we do have our notifications turned on our phone. Yay, I'm glad you turned them off. Mine are off too. I think that's a really important tool that we can use, but we're constantly bombarded by information. If you're going to be in a position like a role that you've put yourself in, that you know, consistently, the thing that you're good at in the world is these jobs where lots of information is flowing through you. Right? You're a hub for people contacting you, and you're connecting people to other people, and et cetera, et cetera. When we're in a job like that, when we have to have stuff flow through us, we have to stay present. There's no other way for us to like take care of our bodies and our lives and ourselves sustainably, right? And I guess I've seen, since we've had that conversation on such a like concrete level, that this stuff is hard. That's part of the reason I wanted to talk about it publicly now, you know?
No, look, I appreciate it. Yeah, I think I see, not just personally, not just professionally, but personally, you know, anytime I sit down with someone, I really want to understand like what it is that their personal goals or objectives are, what they're trying to accomplish, personally and professionally, and then see based on that how I can help. And so, and who is that, putting that in front of someone or giving them some information or sending them in a direction. And so, like, in order to be successful in that, I need to make sure I'm like actually listening and not just listening, but actually asking further questions so I can really understand, you know, what it is they're trying to do. And so I can figure out, okay, you're trying to do this. These are the ways I can help with that. Or these are the folks you need to talk to. But it starts with like really understanding them and not just being like, not making assumptions as to what they're trying to do.
I love that. And actually, you know, that leads me to a question that I think is a really, I'd really like to hear your answer on this one, because authenticity, authentic, genuine, these things have all become buzzwords to some degree. In our lexicon, we're talking about like, oh, that person's, you know, like, be your most authentic self, etc. So what does authenticity mean to you?
I mean, I think authenticity is people, I mean, I think it's like a combination of people really being outright and true as to like where they're coming from and the agenda behind they're coming from, almost to the point of like vulnerability, and people putting themselves in a place where they can let someone in enough to really understand them, and to potentially, if they need help, you know, being direct and asking for that, and also if they can help, like authentically wanting to help the other person as well. And there's gonna be different times where it's not like I help you and you help me. It's like somebody just help someone because you know you want to see someone succeed, and you really want that for that person. And sometimes you have to be comfortable asking someone that can help you be put in a position of success, to ask them and making sure that they understand your intention, and then them wanting to see you succeed.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I think it's a tricky question, but I like what you say about intention, and because if we go back to those circles of energy, if we're asking for something from someone in that energy of like, I need something from you, I'm going to get it, I'm pushing, I'm forcing to get it, people can feel the energy of that, and it just like, it doesn't work. And I think something that I've seen you navigate so beautifully in all these different capacities that you've been working in, you know, in different companies or different positions is when someone comes to you saying like, hey, I'm interested in this, there's a way of you being able to authentically like listen, hear, and connect them to the right person or channel them, you know, that like you can't fake that stuff is I guess the point. Like people aren't going to show up. They're going to stop showing up for the stuff that we're inviting them to, that we're pitching to them, if it's not authentic, right? If there's not the same.
I think also there's a component of, I think time is someone's most valuable asset. You can always make more money. And so if you're going to ask someone to come to an event or to travel to a location or to do something, it's not about the event that you want to have. It's about how is this event in line with what they see as fun, what they see as enjoyable, what they see as meaningful. And so that's a combination of, you know, the activities and the people that you bring and the ease of executing for them, and how can you make it say, okay, wow, this is really, I don't have to worry about anything. And I you know, at this point, I think most people trust the group of people, you know, what we would put together and the intention behind it. And so I think the key is, for me, has been, it's not about what I would want, but it's about making it to cater to the folks that I would want there, so that they would want to be there.
Yeah. And that's presence, isn't it? That's actually leaving space for both any agenda that you have, which is not evil to have an agenda, but then really like adapting the plan to the people who are actually showing up. Yes. I love that. So how about this? Talk to me a little bit about your hopes and dreams for the future. And if you want to make this like Tulsa centric, great, or we can talk on any scale that feels interesting to you. One thing that I realize might be kind of fun to talk about is this like kind of community-based living stuff that you've been thinking about and devising here in Tulsa. So what's the future? You spoke a little bit to the idea of the, you know, ends of the country, the coast of the country, integrating more with the center, which I'm so on board with that conversation. But also, what are the ways in which we create more community?
So for me, yes. I mean, I think that we need to figure out how to better connect the middle of the country with the coast. And Tulsa is wonderful. Not just the George Kaiser Family Foundation, but there's so many amazing family foundations and philanthropy here, in addition to the city hall, that have done amazing work building a $450 million park in the Gathering Place that opens this summer, building an entire arts district over the last 5 years right next to downtown. There's a lot of happening and momentum here. But on the other side, like, no one would ever come here unless people knew it and knew to. And so I think this isn't the only city of its kind, but with everything that us at GKFF are doing, maybe if we can come up with a formula of, hey, if you do these social projects and you bring in these industries and this is the opportunity on the economic development side, you can have this increase in GDP, you can have this increase in population, you can have this increase in population under 40, and 21st century jobs. And then next thing you know, like, there's a more close connection between Tulsa and the San Franciscos, New Yorks, and LAs. And then you write that playbook, and then hopefully other cities, maybe the Memphises and the Omahas and the Lincolns, can follow. And that's how you can really impact change, because then all of a sudden people who are voting, I don't feel like they're left behind, and which really was a lot of the sentiment in 2016. And so, like a macro, you know, geopolitical sense, that's what I'd like to see happen. From more of a micro sense, I think that people really want community, and actually I think Tulsa, much more so than New York or LA, has a much stronger sense of community. But even more micro than that, I think that the traditional norms of how families are raised or how people live, I think that maybe there are other ways of doing that. And so I grew up Jewish, and one of the things they taught us about in schools that was Israel had largely in the 50s and 60s, and still has to this day to some extent, is what's called the kibbutz, which is a communal living where everyone kind of contributes. I imagine a world where, let's say 8 families live in this large building or complex, and they share a huge living area, and they have their own little 2 or 3 or 4 bedroom apartments with their own little kitchen and living room, but one huge common living area with communal dinners and breakfasts. And you can aggregate some staff with a cleaner and a nanny that are shared amongst the 8 families. So it's much more affordable, and people can actually communally help, raise their kids together. So someone's traveling, it's not a big deal because there's they're essentially their aunts and uncles and brothers and sisters in this little community living situation. And so we're looking to build that here in Tulsa, just north of downtown. And we're going to call it the Tulsa Butts. And we're looking to break ground in the fall this year. And so just working on that. And I think if this does work, this is something that maybe I think many communities would adapt, and it'd be a thing.
On the topic of presence, right? Like, I'm thinking about the fact that the building I most recently lived in Brooklyn, that my head must have been 5 feet, 7 feet away from, I assume if the person on the other side of the wall, if their bed was up against the wall, then I'm sleeping every night very close to another human being who I don't even know who they are. I've never met them. We've never had a conversation. Every once in a while I hear the sound of the television coming through the wall, but that's about it. It is it's kind of cuckoo bananas when you think about the way that we're living in our big cities these days, that we just are surrounded by so many people, which has an impact on our nervous system. That's a lot of energy for us to be present with. And yet we are not making these genuine, deep connections all at the same time. There's so many people, and yet we're alone, right? Yeah. And so I do also think that the questions you're exploring right now in terms of the businesses that we're building, et cetera, start to look at that and go how can we do things differently? How can we create communities and businesses and cities in a different way?
Yeah.
There was something that you said before that I did want to circle back to, if it comes back to me, which is, it may not come back to me, but essentially, I think it's important to have the difficult. I know what it was about. The difficult conversations around. So let me ask this question. Being here in Tulsa, Oklahoma, in the middle of the United States now, is it that we need more of I don't know if gentrification is actually the right word, but more of the energy from the coast coming here? Or I guess my question for you, and maybe I'll continue this conversation with KJ in our politics conversation later, but what have you learned from being here in Tulsa about the way that life is lived here that maybe we could carry more to the coasts? And maybe we're already speaking to it in this community thing, but is there anything else you could say around business?
I think Tulsa does a really good job of thinking of being mindful of the individual, and it's a much smaller town. So and I also haven't interacted a ton with the big business here, but it's a much smaller town, and people are much more cognizant of the individual circumstances and the persons they're doing business with or interacting with, and not just the transaction. With that comes a much slower pace of doing business. So there's a positive and a negative with that. Mm-hmm. I think, though, it's interesting. There's a great deal of tradition and the way things have been and the way things and how Tulsa's gotten here. That's regularly part of the everyday life of Tulsa is the history of Tulsa, much more so than New York, which is in LA, which is much more where things are and where things are going. There's much less, emphasis on historical Hollywood, or even Robert Moses, who's one of the biggest developers in New York, who largely built that city, versus some of the people who have made a huge impact in Tulsa. You actually still hear about that regularly. It's interesting to hear. It's a culture that's very much cognizant of its past in relation to its present, and I think there's pros and cons for sure. It's just interesting to see the cultural difference.
Yeah, that came up in my brain as we were talking as the challenging and yet important question to ask is, rather than, us young ones come in and be like, hey, this is how we've been living in San Francisco and Los Angeles and New York, and now we're going to bring it here. How do we respect the shoulders upon which we stand and the places that we're entering, so that we're not, modern day colonialists, so to speak, right?
Yeah, I think I think there's a balance for both, and I think hope that might be an area in which I help connect maybe some of the folks in town to some of the ideas of the future and things that we've been looking at, and technologies and different ways of exploring civic innovation, and that's hopefully something I can bring to the table because I've had a great deal of exposure to that.
I've sometimes heard with those back to the circles of energy, I've sometimes heard first circle described as being more like thinking about the past, third circle described as thinking more about the future, and second circle as thinking more about the present. And so I think that's part of why presence is so important in these business and networking conversations, and these like, how do we change the way business is being done in cities, and how do we bring things, new ideas in, but also it's got to have that flow and that give and take of respect for the past, excitement about the future, but really staying present and, you know, seeing what's actually going on in the situation at any given moment, right?
Yeah, I think it is really easy to get too engulfed in what has been or where things are going. And so I agree, like making sure in either direction you're looking in, how that ties into the present is key.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so before we wrap up, this is all really interesting, and I appreciate the depth to which we've gone in the conversation. I want to just ask if you have any like stories that you want to tell us, anecdotes about either times that presence, like that you feel like, yeah, I rocked it, I was really present, something went really well, or it's always fun to hear if maybe there's like this is a time that something didn't go as well because I wasn't as present.
Yeah, I think I think that it's interesting. I recently took a meeting with an city-based organization that I wanted to kind of have more of a partnership with, and I went in there really trying to, I don't want to say sell them, but really trying to kind of explain to them where I'm coming from, and getting them to see things from my perspective. And I was not able to kind of get them to get them to even warm up, or they were like kind of yesing me, but I could tell like I wasn't getting buy-in. And then I tried to turn around, and I hope I successfully did, and kind of say, okay, so what are you looking for? What are you trying to do? And really kind of taking in what they were looking for, and adjusting, you know, how I adjusting both what I was suggesting or proposing, as well as how I was framing it, to be able to come up with say, okay, if we do this, this can address your concerns this way. So basically understanding and recognizing what they were trying to accomplish, and how this can work for them in accomplishing that, versus like what I think it would accomplish. And so it was the key moment was just, it was recognizing that I'm like in the third circle, and I'm just like pushing onto them my agenda, versus like having a two-way conversation and understanding them, and then trying to say, okay, is there a way to get across what I need to get across that's also relevant for them, not just relevant for me. And so I was happy that I at least recognized that this is, I caught myself, looking back, I wish I came in differently, but I caught myself and was able to kind of adjust my approach midway through.
Well, thank you for sharing a story like that vulnerably, because I think that that's really important for all of us to hear, because I can even say, as someone who coaches and teaches this stuff, I'm not perfect either. So of course. And so to hear, you know, that like, oh God, I started off on the wrong foot, or like I caught myself doing something not the way that I wanted to, and then I was able to readjust back to like, right, what does it feel like to be present? How do I like really focus on the person in front of me? How do I just like be here in this moment and turn it back on them so it doesn't become all about me, right? So yeah, thank you for sharing that vulnerably. I think that's helpful for all of us to hear. It's part of the reason I wanted to have you here, is because I think that it's just really nice to be down to earth about a conversation like this and be like, this is how I accomplish things. Sometimes I mess up. Sometimes I succeed really beautifully, and that's business, friends. You know, like that's.
Yeah, no, I appreciate you having me, and I hope this was useful. And I really am grateful for the work you've done with me on the campaign and in general, and grateful to have you as a friend.
Me too.
And to have you in Tulsa.
I was going to say thank you for being the only dude in the summit.
My pleasure.
Thanks for representing the boys. Amazing. All right, everyone. Thank you so much for tuning in for this conversation. The conversation happening tonight at 8:30 p.m. Eastern is with Jen Netherby about presence in your teaching. She's a yoga teacher, going to be like kind of along the same lines, except totally different, right? So join us for that, and I will see you for the rest of the Present and Awesome conversations. Thank you again, Mike.
Bye.
All right. Bye, everyone.